Sorry, I forgot to record this for Doug. So
Oh.
let me just start this for Doug. I think he's the only one who watches it. Sorry. Hi, Doug. If you're watching this, we just remembered to turn on the thing, and we basically said that these 7 verses in chapter 3 are a prayer that Habbukuk is offering up on behalf of the people. Is that right? That's kind of the shorthand of it. And we were just taking on verse 1 that has that word shigianoth in it, and that is kind of a movement. And Anita just said that in church sometimes when she's singing, she feels like swaying a little bit to the hymns, depending on what the hymn is. I know when we're singing, we are praying in the light of God. We are praying walking in the light of God. I feel I can't just stand still during that hymn. That's just something I have to move to. So I know it looks a little strange, but I just can't help myself. I don't want to help myself either because I think it's a good expression. So this prayer is to be offered up with great emotion.
Hello.
Right? It's great emotion.
Carol?
Yeah.
And
This is Fred Bertram.
Hey. Oh, yeah.
and
Unfortunately, I'm in a.
I think sometimes in our tradition we tend to tamp down emotion, right, as part of the worship experience. But it's been a part of our tradition for a long time. We just tamp it down a little bit, or tend to tamp it down a little bit. When you're at home praying, does emotion play a part of your prayer life? I know in corporate worship, not so much. A little bit here and there, but for the most part, not. When you're praying at home, does emotion play a part of your prayer life?
For me, no.
Not so much.
Sometimes
Sometimes.
that's when you're sort of spontaneously pray. Something
Mhm.
happens and you respond to it, and that's emotion.
And that's an emotional response
Yes.
to whatever's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah. How about you, Anita? Do you have an emotional response to prayer sometimes?
Always do. Otherwise, I don't know what it's about if it's not emotion, really.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a wide
I was
variety.
going to say, sometimes I look up.
Okay, so there you go. That's
Yeah.
your shigianoth.
Yeah.
That's your body responding
but-
to the prayer.
Yeah. Sometimes.
Yeah.
Most of the time it's this way.
Yep.
Well, is that responding to this notion of God being in heaven above us?
Yeah. I think that's why. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh God,
Yeah. Oh.
help me.
Sure.
Yeah.
How about you, Carol? Do you have an emotional?
I was just thinking of the football players and all, when they score something, they
Yes.
point out. It's kind of nice.
Yeah.
I really,
Baseball players do too. Particularly if they hit a home run, as they cross home plate.
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
They give a salute to God when they cross home plate. Yeah.
I know some people think it's phony, but I think if they're acknowledging
It's very
presence
public.
stronger than
too.
themselves, that's
Very public. It's
Yeah.
like telling everyone.
Yeah.
As for me, I'm usually writing with a pencil, trying to
When-
remember people,
Oh, sure.
if I can tell who it is.
Yep. Yeah. So when you're praying, you're trying to keep track of things when you're praying.
Then I take it home and I can do it again and again.
Good.
Could I read something from this Bible?
Of course.
It says, the prayer of the prophet in the form of a divine warrior hymn. The prophet, unsatisfied with God's previous responses, turns from complaint to petition. He invokes the biblical memory that God once marched as a divine warrior to vindicate the people. And it goes on as the basis for his request that God march again to establish justice. The books, no, never mind, we won't go on.
Okay.
But it's kind of interesting, I think, that a warrior's hymn.
Yeah, I think the next section, verses 8 and on, is where kind of the warrior stuff pops up, more so than what we have in these first 7 verses. But
Yeah, they just say 1 through 19.
yeah.
There are images of power here.
They are images of power, and they're
His splendor was like the sunrise rays flashed from his hand, where his power was hidden.
yeah,
Latent power.
it's potential power, right? So he's got it there, but you're not going to see everything. He's not playing God's not playing all the cards at once. God's holding some things back so that you can be surprised. So the prayer in verse 2 begins by looking back on God's accomplishments. And this is kind of a prophetic trope, I guess, is the prophet reminds God of who God has been. And it reminds God and it reminds the people of who God has been, right? Of who God has been for them and with them. And so, Lord, I have heard of your fame. And fame is something that's passed on from one person to another. It's kind of the word of mouth, right? Passing on a legacy. And if we were to say, Lord, I have heard of your fame here at BCC, what would that include? What would some of that fame be? Where has God moved in our church through the years? Where have you seen God? Or been told? Maybe you haven't seen it yourself, but you've been told of God's fame here.
The music ministry.
The music ministry, yeah.
The shelter. The homeless shelter.
The homeless shelter, our attendance to the homeless shelter, yeah. Which we'll be doing in March this year. Well, next year. Yeah. For 3 weeks. And here.
Here.
Well,
Our walk with the food, for the food.
our what?
Our walk.
Our crop walks.
Our crop
Yes.
walk, yeah.
Yep. To help the poor. That's where God has been. Yeah. I think in the building of BB Hall, and the building of this building, there was a vision that the people had that God was dwelling in this place, that God trusted that we would be good caretakers of this place and glorify God in this place. So that's part of God's fame here at this church. The work with the Baroness.
How about the original founding of the church by Walter Law? He clearly had a vision.
He had a vision, right?
Because, the churches closer to the river were regarded as more churches for the wealthy. And the people here,
This was more for the community.
and specifically for the workers on his farm. But, it was not to be like the churches on the river.
Yeah. So I have heard of your prayer, and so we tell of your fame. We tell those stories about this to one another, to newcomers. We tell them that story. We tell the children those stories so that it can be passed on, and God's fame can be solid in the memories of the people, and it reminds God too of who we've been together. We've been that people that were trustworthy. We've been that people who helped the poor, who helped the refugees, who did all those things, who helped.
A couple of years ago, we did a study on the book of Acts, and it struck me that Paul and Peter and the other people at Habbukuk, they would go to they were preaching in the temples often,
Mhm.
and they would start off with the story of the Exodus.
Sure.
They would, and not just once, but again and again in Acts, you hear this story of
Yep.
the deliverance. That this is, they're telling what God has done in the past.
Sure.
Especially if they're Jewish.
Well, they were.
They were largely preaching to the Jews.
They were, yeah, in that first century, that was primarily the people that they were.
Was it?
Oh yeah.
The Greeks were, I mean.
Well, the first couple of missionary journeys were more. Am I right?
To the Jewish populations, yeah.
And then the third and fourth
And
expanded.
then they moved to the Gentiles, but they started with the people who they knew,
Yeah.
which makes sense, and then they branched out and
Right.
said, well, we've done our work here, let's see who else we can get. So, think of something, but it'll pop up again. So this is to be a communal song and prayer. And he says, I stand in awe of your deeds, Lord. And this is something I learned a long time ago, that the word awe and the word fear are the same word in Hebrew, but the context kind of decides the meaning of how you're going to interpret it. And so I stand in fear of your deeds, or I stand in awe of your deeds. And I guess sometimes when we are filled with awe, we can be afraid. When we're afraid, we can be in awe. But the word Lord is repeated to emphasize the covenantal relationship between God and the people of Judah. So, Lord, I've heard of your fame. I stand in awe of your deeds, Lord. So that's used twice right there, just to remind everybody about that relationship. So what Habakkuk's doing here is he's really trying to reconnect everybody with this prayer. So when we think about awe, what about God are you in awe of?
I think I came across a quote once about the strangest thing in the Bible is God. I mean, this concept.
The concept of God, yeah.
And then I've always thought that once you accept that, you can accept almost anything else.
Yeah.
If you can accept this totally illogical premise.
Right.
And when people say, well, you can't prove that, my answer always is, that's why they call it faith.
That is why, yeah.
Okay.
Right. And I think the proof of God is that by believing in God, it makes our lives better, right? It changes. So we couldn't believe in something and put our lives around something that didn't exist. It wouldn't have any effect on us if it didn't exist, if it wasn't real. But we put our lives around God, and in doing so, it changes things for us. It changes how we
That's Kierkegaard's leap of faith.
Yeah.
You give up the finite and gain the infinite.
and gain the infinite in doing so. Right, it changes how you interact with people, how you think about people who are different from you, how you are going to think about justice, how you, everything changes. If you have God at the center, then your world is different than if you don't have. If you had that vase over there in the center of your world and you made that the touchstone for everything you did, then you might, want to spend a lot of time polishing it so that you could see yourself in it or figure out what's going on with that vase. But we don't. We put our faith in God instead, who's different, who's alive and changing, and we have new ideas about God. So that's a good thing to be in awe of. Anything else that we're in awe of God about?
The
beauty of our earth, yeah.
Especially now, right?
Well, yeah,
We've had a fabulous fall.
here in this part of the world, yeah, very, very beautiful time for us. Yeah. A couple months, not so much, but well, different kind of beauty, I guess.
Yeah.
If we get snow on top of things, that pretties it up a little bit. Yeah.
We have Jesus, who's our Savior.
We do.
That's the most awe-inspiring thing I can think of.
That God came to earth and walked around among us and continues to walk among us, and the Spirit, yeah, that's pretty awe-inspiring.
The Word became flesh and dwelt among us.
Yep.
And that he's really with us, you, and everything.
Yeah.
That's awe-inspiring, really.
I think that if you believe in God, you will see awe in many things.
Yes.
The birth of a child. Springtime when flowers start blooming. Anything that's new brings awe to me.
Yeah.
So I will admit, there are some days when I can't find God. So I try to look for something that will bring awe to me and bring God back to me.
That sounds like a great spiritual practice.
It really does, doesn't it?
Try to do it.
Yeah, yeah.
Try to do it.
Well,
There's some days it's very,
Trying is a big part of
very hard.
the experience, yeah.
Yeah.
I think there are days when it is hard to find God in the midst, just like Habbukuk couldn't
Yeah.
find God,
Yeah.
and when things are really coming at you fast and furious, it can be really difficult to experience God. But if you can step out of that whirlwind of sorts
Yes.
and say, well, where is some beauty, or where, it can sometimes help you reconnect in.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think Habbukuk has stepped out a little bit. He's had an experience at this point in his journey where he has seen the awesomeness of God again. Not just the devastation
Yeah, that's
of the
what I'm
Babylonians,
feeling
but
in this.
he's seen God now.
Like, I almost feel like he's, at one point, he's questioning God so much.
Mm-hmm.
But then at this point in time, he's more trusting God now, at this point in time.
Yep. Yeah.
But he's still waiting to say, are you gonna do something?
Well, yeah, he wants God to hurry up with this.
What's your next step?
Right, yeah. I know you're there.
Yeah,
Could you hurry up and,
Help us
and I
Yes.
think it's because he can see his people are suffering.
yeah, I wrote down, he knows what God can do, but he's saying, what's the delay?
Yeah. Tick tock, the clock's.
Yeah.
Come along there, God. Yeah. There were times, and you probably some of you felt this way too, during the early days of the pandemic. In my prayers, I'd say, God, how long can we hang on with this? How long can we see the bodies piling up in the city, and and people suffering and living in fear, and how long can we do this? And if you could move this a little faster, get us a vaccine a little faster, that would be great. And I know that was part of my prayers for a chunk of time, and then the gratitude when we did finally get vaccines. When Martha, she maybe told you, when we went to the Javits Center to get our vaccine, we went in and we were excited and happy that we were going to finally get vaccinated, and I think it was right around her birthday even. So, the they put the jab in the arm, and she just started crying. And the woman was like, "Are you okay?" The nurse who was giving it to her, and she said, "I'm just so happy I can see my kids now.
Yes.
You know, I'll be able to see my kids again
Yeah.
because I got this." And
Yeah.
she just felt such relief
Yes.
with
Yeah.
that. You know, I just felt joy. It was just like,
You know, we went to the county center, and that was the happiest place in the world.
absolutely.
Everyone was, oh, thank you, and, oh, please go ahead of me. I mean,
Yeah.
people were just like,
I
Yeah.
heard that,
Yeah.
Remember that?
I wasn't there, but I did hear that.
Yes. Oh, it was.
Oh, it was. It was.
Yeah.
Yeah, they had a piano set up in the Javits Center, and people would go over and play it. You know, happy days are here again.
Right, right.
It was great. It was a celebration.
Now, let's
I'm-
go back. I was just wondering, at first it was a prediction that Babylonians were coming, now they're here.
Yeah, at this point they've
So
been
that's-
here for a while.
So that's really time has passed.
Time has passed between
Yeah.
chapter 1 and chapter 2.
So I wonder,
A chunk of time has passed, and in chapter 2 we kind of see the devastation and what the Babylonians are like from the perspective of the people of Judah. And then in chapter 3 they're still there, but something has shifted in Habbukuk that he has a different understanding of God's presence in the lives of the people. He's starting to, I call it in connecting the dots. He's connected some dots so that lead to God, and he's going to share those dots with
did
us.
he call himself a prophet?
hmm Yeah, he calls himself a prophet. So he says, repeat them in our day. Oh, I did want to go back to the awe thing again. Do you think in our culture, not in this room here, because we've already said we've got awe in God. Do you think we've lost as a culture the ability to be awed?
Interesting.
Well, that's why I get the big bucks.
Hard to generalize for the whole world, you mean? Or
Well,
less?
they just saying Briarcliff or the United States or whatever, in New York. Do you think people kind of go through life without being in awe and without taking in the wonder? Because I think if you do that, life becomes a bit more disposable. And everything around you becomes, and the Babylonians, right? They treated the world as pretty disposable. They weren't in awe of God.
Maybe that's something, with these guns, just everybody has a gun, and I mean,
Yeah,
they, no respect for life. I just heard it this morning, and he said, this man has no respect for life.
right.
This man, they had just captured.
Yeah.
You're right.
Well, and the
Right.
idea that if someone attacks, we're just going to kill them.
The only response to a gun is
The
a
only
bigger
response
gun.
to a gun is a bigger gun. And I mean, I get people are afraid,
Yeah.
but I don't know, it just seems like that's an odd solution.
Now more and more the response to words is a gun.
Is a gun, right? Or a hammer.
Yeah, right. Have you heard these weird conspiracy theories about the attack on Paul Pelosi? I mean, it's just appalling.
It's, yeah. Well, and it's to distract from the real crime, which was somebody broke into someone's house,
And
held
they're
them
glad-
hostage, and prepared to hurt his wife. I mean, that's the crime, not any little conspiracy theory of, like, there was a legitimization of that.
Yeah.
There's no legitimization of that.
No, that's not acceptable.
No, it's not acceptable behavior. But it's
Are these
being,
people sick or what? I just don't know.
But as this extremism continues and grows, I think that beats down and puts a damper on awe.
I couldn't hear that.
As this violence and extremism grows, and we start to accept it, not like it, but
Part of our
don't know how to respond, I mean, just back off.
Yeah.
I think it wears us down, and it's a damper on being able to experience awe. I think it has a very numbing effect.
Mm.
So,
Extremism makes doing these things okay, right?
Yeah.
You can attack the Capitol and do things
Because you can,
yeah.
right? There's not, you don't need a reason, you just can, so you do it.
They're just far out, you know, I just, as you say, no awe, no.
But, you know, when those images came of that, from that newest telescope.
The Hubble, yeah.
No, it's the one
The
beyond the
Webb.
Hubble.
Is it the Webb?
I think so.
Yeah.
And, I mean, those were awe-inspiring.
They were very, yeah.
First they were unexpectedly beautiful, but just the idea
And
that you're
detailed.
looking at so many light years away was just
Right, that is a good example of awe.
Yeah.
I'm
Maybe
having a
that-
hard time hearing what people are saying, but I just want to throw in that it seems to me that children in particular, but adults also, have gotten numb to all kinds of violence and terrible things that are shown on TV, in movies and whatnot. They don't seem to be bothered by terrible acts and by fire, and just think of anything that's awful, and they sort of just listen to it and go on their way. And I can't look at most of those things. I remember being in the movies, in times past, and I was shrinking down in my seat, and kids were just going on to the next thing and eating their candy or drinking their soda. And I've noticed that things that people watch on TV, and it seems that it can't be violent enough for some people. So, I don't know where the feeling of humanity is. And it really bothers me. That's my feeling about what awes you, because
Yeah, I think you just echoed some of the things that you couldn't hear us saying, but you said it very nicely, Anita. And I think maybe that's a place for the church where we can maybe speak of awesome things and say, yep, there is this stuff, but there's also this stuff which is of God, which is big. We sometimes have to be in the Habbukuk world, but
yes.
we also need to, because we need to pay attention to stuff, because that's reality. That is what's happening. But we can also point people towards the other things that are going on that bring us awe and bring us joy and hope. Right? 'Cause that's
Yeah, the news always is negative.
Yeah.
Sensational,
Yes.
Well,
has to be.
normality is not news, that's the problem.
right. Normality is not news.
No.
Right.
So people have to up the ante so that they can get into the news and be noticed.
The more outrageous.
All right, let's move on. Repeat them in our day, in our time. I stand in awe of your deeds, Lord. Repeat them in our day, in our time. Make them known. In wrath, remember mercy. And our time, our day, and our time refer to the time between when God intervened at the Exodus. That was our time, but also that God's going to continue to work to the end of time. And so Habbukuk here is saying he lives in the between those two. Things aren't fixed up yet, but they're moving. He trusts they're moving in that. And God's going to continue to be the Lord of the people. Right now, the people are suffering, and so he's pleading for relief for his people, much like we were pleading for that relief during the early days of the pandemic. We were saying, God, the people are suffering, please send us relief. So, and he talks about it in terms of God's wrath. Despite God's wrath, he's pleading for relief. He wants God to remember mercy in the midst of God's anger. And so I started thinking, I'm not God at all. And so I was trying to think, well, how does God convert wrath into mercy? I mean, how would I convert wrath into mercy? What would I need to have happen so that my wrath could become mercy?
I wrote, mercy refers to deeply felt love and compassion.
Yeah.
In your wrath, remember mercy. You know, sometimes if I'm very angry with someone, I try to think back to something they did that was kind or good. And I try to remember that about them and get past my anger at whatever they've done.
Yep. I think that's important to see the humanity in people, that they can have two things going on and still be the person that you loved.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think love is a big part of it. Love is a big part. Do you think that, and I'm not really sure here, does admission of guilt play a part in mercy? Does a person have to admit that they did something wrong for mercy to happen, or is mercy something separate? When I wrote that question, I wasn't sure of the answer, so I was hoping you could help.
Well, mercy would come from the person who's aggrieved.
Right.
So it might be easier if the person admitted guilt, but I don't think they would have to.
Yes. Hearing them say, I'm sorry, or I recognize that what I did was
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah, I think I read it in here, and I put a question mark next to it. Asking for mercy is an admission of guilt.
I think
Yes.
so. Confessing's almost,
Yeah.
Or you have to recognize if someone admits guilt but indirectly. They don't really say, I'm sorry,
Yes.
but then they try to do something to make up for it, and you have to say, okay, that's
How they're doing it.
how they're saying I'm sorry.
Right. They don't have the words that I maybe need, but I can see their actions are taking
Exactly.
in a different direction. Yeah. Nancy, what are you thinking? I
Well,
can see the wheels spinning.
Yeah, I haven't got the answer, but we're talking now about two people, one being aggrieved and one being whatever, the aggressor, and how they reconcile it. But your question was how to turn wrath to mercy, and that's one person who's angry and
Yeah, how does theirs? Yeah.
vengeful, and
And
how
do
do
they need to see-
internally
Good
change
point.
attitude from
Mhm.
anger and wrath to mercy and kindness and love. And I don't know what that process is or exactly.
Yeah.
Or how they would go through that. But that's kind of different from, I
It
think, what we
is, it
started
is.
talking about of
That's-
Well,
apologies and.
Yeah.
and-
Yeah, well, I was just wondering if hearing the person who did the thing that you're upset about and feeling wrath about, hearing them say, I'm sorry, I confess that what they did was wrong, if that might help you feel merciful. That's where it connects, where the two questions connect. Are you familiar with the word hesed in the Bible? Hesed. Hesed. I knew a rabbi up in Vermont when I was first here. He named one of his kids Hesed. And it's a wonderful, wonderful word from the Hebrew Bible. And it means mercy, compassion, love, grace, and faithfulness. It kind of takes all those words together. and he named his child that, which is such a beautiful thing, that my child will be this, is kind of was his hope.
Love, grace, compassion.
Faithfulness, love,
Faithfulness.
grace, compassion.
Is
Compassion.
that what this mercy is, Hassan?
I think so. I think the word here for mercy is pretty close to, Habakkuk's using it like that, like Hesed. And I tried looking up if that was the exact word he used, but it feels like he's going in that direction with it. He's asking for God to show that kind of love. And what's interesting is Hesed isn't just an emotion or a feeling on behalf of someone in need, but it's also an action. It's a compassionate behavior towards another person. So it's not just a feeling, but it's also an action that you take out of a sense of love and loyalty for the person. So if you think about if you've seen a child do something terrible and you get so angry, but then you remember how much you love that child, and so you feel mercy for that child. And Joan said, somebody who really makes her angry, she remembers something she loves about that person, something lovable that they did. That's really where you can maybe move in that direction of Hesed, of that mercy, compassionate mercy. It's a good.
And you know, to Nancy's point, I wonder if the transgressor can use that when they're doing something terrible in their own mind, think, oh, I wasn't always this way.
Right. I think restorative justice tries to work in that direction of reminding people of who they are and of their connection to other people. Because a lot of time when people commit acts of murder, or they rob somebody or beat somebody or rape somebody, those are acts of somebody who's detached, who wants just power for themselves, who wants stuff for themselves, and they've forgotten really, or lost track of, that they're part of a web of humanity. And so restorative justice often will have you sit with the person, if possible, to hear the impact of that behavior. The victim will sit with the person who did something to them in a very, positive way, and say, this is how this made me feel. I wasn't able to work. I couldn't sleep. I did. And a lot of times the person who's done the terrible act, that interaction is a Hesed moment, because they remember their humanity and that they've done something against another human being. It makes it not just an inanimate object that they did this against, but a real person.
I was interested in this courtroom in Florida where the parents of the
I was thinking
children
the
who were
same
murdered
thing.
are
Yeah.
addressing, and what they're saying to them is horrible.
Is
Yeah.
what?
Horrible.
Oh, yeah.
I hope you suffer every day of your life.
Yeah,
I mean, there
I
is
saw that
no.
too, yeah.
Right, yeah, that's not really restorative
That's
justice. No.
But do you think that's why there's a time in court that they permit that? I don't know why.
Well, it comes from the idea of victims' rights, that, but I
That's
think
true.
it's gone to a, and I contrast it with the people at Mother Emanuel Church when they said, we forgive you.
Right.
It's a whole different, and
Right.
what I wanted to say to these people is, wishing this on him is not gonna help you. It's not gonna bring your child back.
No, and in a restorative justice situation, they would have the parents of the victims say, this is what
Yeah.
this is what you took from me.
Yes.
This is what happened to my heart and my life when
Yes,
my
they
child
do.
was
You
murdered.
know what I once learned? I once learned, I think it was called the I message.
Yes.
You say, I feel, somebody has done something terrible. What you just did I felt
Yes.
and let them know what you felt about what they did. So you always say,
Yes,
I am very angry
yes.
because you, whatever.
Yeah.
I am mad at you because the I message.
Right.
That's the old, do you remember a child psychologist named Chaim Ganot? He was very popular about 50 years ago. And that was attack, criticize the deed, not the doer.
Oh, okay.
And it was, and you'd say to your child, you know, it really makes me unhappy when you're mean to your little sister.
Mhm.
And it worked on husbands too, we found.
No doubt. No
But
doubt.
it was, you don't attack the person.
Right.
You say, this is how what you did made me feel.
Right.
So those parents in Florida, if we could put words in their mouth, they would say, I am very angry. I am feeling anger. I am feeling mad. What you did to my child.
Mhm.
Well, I think,
I know you can't
mm,
I can't get my child back, but I am feeling, and let that child, he was a child,
Yeah.
God, you know,
but I think what you
give
would say,
him,
not just,
maybe he would, if people, I'm sorry, I'm getting all my words mixed up. I think if people could only remember that other people have such anger that it's not you, it's them. So how can we help them?
She have anger too.
I'm not saying it the way I want, so I'll stop. I'm just,
but I think what
I
you,
agree with you, like, it really did upset me when I saw those
it
parents
really did.
throwing those words at that child.
They did say, though, some of the things that you just said. I am bereft. I have lost the love of my life.
Right.
They did do that,
Yeah.
which is if they'd stopped there, right?
Yeah, but
But I, would say to him, I feel sad every time I walk in his room. That's almost more powerful than saying, I'm mad at you.
Sure.
yeah,
Sure. Yeah, because that puts it in a very personal perspective.
Yeah.
Kind of gives it that God perspective, that wider perspective. That there's not a place in the house I can't go where I don't see his toy and
Right.
he's not playing with it.
Yes.
And I will never watch him grow up, and I will never, need you to understand that
Mm.
you took all that away from me. Those are the
But
losses
I
that.
wonder if it has any impact on the person being addressed. I have no idea.
Yeah, when-
That may have more impact than being told go to hell, because that, I want you to burn in hell, because that's probably a message they've heard so long that they don't pay any attention to it.
That's their message.
That's their message. That's right. Yeah, they're just, yep, okay, whatever. That's,
Yeah, is it, what you're doing is, he was felt anger and then you're expressing more anger.
It's just escalating the anger in the world instead of tamping it down.
which we can all sit here and cogitate, but none of us has ever gone through that. How would you feel?
Mm-hmm. I knew two people who had children who were murdered.
You do.
I did, and it's a different dynamic.
Would they have felt any different if the verdict had, and the sentencing had in fact been capital punishment
Yes, yeah, very good question.
instead of life?
Life in prison.
So part of their anger was
Yep.
that they felt he deserved a more extreme punishment
I think
that
so.
wasn't given to
But
him.
now they're gonna change the law right away too. Did you hear that?
It's an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. You took a life, you should take your life.
On the saying that's the right way to
No,
feel,
no,
but
no, you're right.
part of the expression there was exasperation with
Yep.
the perpetrator not having gotten the maximum sentence.
That's right.
Sure.
Someone said that probably if he had gotten it, it would be years and years and years
Of
before it
appeals
would
and-
happen, and he would be in the headlines every time, and they would be suffering more. And if he, now when he goes to jail, nobody's gonna ever hear from him again.
Right.
That was one point I read that I thought, that's a thought.
I remember when Gabby Giffords, when they addressed her, and her husband said something, he said, we're not gonna let you occupy our minds anymore.
Yeah.
We're just gonna leave, we're gonna forget about you. And I thought, if he can do it, that's very healthy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And probably he has some days when he can, and some days he can't. That's. All right, let's move to verses 3 through 7. And Habakkuk's describing his inner eye experience of God appearing before Judah. And he does such beautiful language. So it's a theophany. Are you familiar with that word,
Yes.
theophany?
It's a new word, it's a good word.
It's a great word, yeah. It's a manifestation of God on earth. You know, you can actually see this. It's kind of the burning bush experience. When God's just so vividly right there, and you go, "Whoa, yeah, there's God, there's God." And so Habakkuk has had this experience, and he wants to share it with all the people, so that they know that God has not forsaken them. Have any of you had a theophany experience, an experience of God, like, boom, right in the room with you, and you're like, or outside with you, and you say, "Oh yeah, there's God's been here."
I remember a former minister of this church told me that a parishioner went to the Himalayas, and he said he looked at the mountains and he saw God, and he said, well, you could have come down to the corner of South State and Elm Road and seen God any Sunday you chose to. I thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah,
You didn't
yeah.
have to go to the Himalayas.
Right. You don't have to go to the Himalayas, but no. Sometimes when we're talking with the people at the emergency shelter, I sometimes feel like, oh, God's here right now. And yeah, there was a guy, and some of you have been around for a while might remember, it was before the pandemic, and we had a snowstorm, and the guys stayed in.
Yes,
Stayed
yeah,
in.
that's right. I
And
remember it.
you remember that?
It was
Yeah.
before you came, right? Or
No, there was one.
then
There
it
was one
happened
when
with-
I was here
It
too.
happened earlier also.
Yeah, but on this occasion, I got a call, and we were like, "Yeah, that's fine. We're not going to come over because it's snow. Nobody's around. Nobody's going out." And I got a call from Marco, the guy who was
Yeah.
facilitating,
Mhm.
and he said, "Pastor, I wanted you to know that we had to call the police. They're on their way over." I said, "Oh no, what's going on?" He said, "One of the guys snuck some drugs in, and he's been acting very aggressively." So I just told him, "Hey, that's the rules. You need to go." So I came over, and the guy was kind of hunkered in his sleeping bag and grumbling, and he was swearing at me in Spanish, and and I was like, "Oh, I love you too." And so I said, "You need to leave because you've made it unsafe here. You're an unsafe person for you and for the other people who are here, and we want this to be a safe place for everybody. So the police are going to take you someplace safe." And I think it was his second or third time, so he was out of the program for the winter then, so he was done. So I said, "Next year I hope you can get into rehab, and you can clean up so you can come back. But until that, it's just not good for you to come here." So he swore at me some more, and the police came and they took him out, and said, "We'll be praying for you." So the next year, he was back in the program. He was back, and Marco had told me that this guy was back, but that he had gotten into AA or Narcanon or whatever, and he was doing okay. I said, that's great. So I came to meet everybody, and he came in and he looked at me, and he had really big eyes. I said, "Amigo, you're back." And he went, "Pastor, I'm so sorry. Forgive me. And I said, "You were very sick. You're better now. Yes?" And he said, "Yes, yes, yes." And I said, "This is where God is right here." You know, I could just feel God's presence. He was feeling welcomed. His humanity was somehow restored, and I felt restored by that, you know, that experience.
Wow.
It was a very holy moment, you know. It was
Remember the earlier incident, and they stayed here, I think, all day. I mean, it snowed all day.
yeah,
And so Bonnie said, you know, that's not a comfortable space downstairs. So they were up here.
sure.
And she was working in her office. And she said it never felt more like church.
Oh.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
You know,
Yeah.
the guys were out here.
Guys chitting, chatting.
And they had their cell phones, and I think they had a TV they were watching.
Yeah,
programs, you know, they were.
Probably.
And they had food for them, you know, they were looking after them. And it never
Yeah.
felt more like church.
Yeah, that's good. You have moments like that. So, so let's read 3-7. Somebody want to read that out loud? Because these words should be read out loud, I think.
I'll read half of it.
Sure.
Oh, go crazy, Nancy.
Right.
And I want to see a lot of movement with it too, and emotion. You rocking and rolling and doing your
Well,
shigany off.
No
thing.
promises there.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. God came from Teman, the Holy One from Mount Paran. His glory covered the heavens, and the earth was full of his praise. The brightness was like the sun. Rays came forth from his hand, where his power lay hidden. Before him went pestilence, and plague followed close behind.
6 and 7.
He stood and shook the earth. He looked and made the nations tremble. The ancient mountains crumbled, and the age-old hills collapsed. His ways are eternal. I saw the tents of Cushan in distress, the dwellings of Midian in anguish.
Good imagery there, huh? Great imagery. So this is from his inner eye experience. Habakkuk saw this happening. And, the place where God was coming from is less important than that God was coming. The Holy One was coming. And there's a Salah after Mount Paran, and Mount Paran, that Salah. Have you ever seen that in our Psalms? Usually, you see
Yeah.
Salah written
What
up.
is it?
Salah. Yeah, it means it means something that we don't know for certain. But it was a ritual activity that the people would do there. So it was either you clap your hands, you raise your hands, you bow. We don't know exactly what it means, but it
Something
was
in worship.
some kind of worshipful
A musical
activity,
term.
right? Yeah. So if you saw God approaching, like Habbukuk describes, coming through the mess of life, how would it feel? I mean, who could stand if you had that happening? What would that feel like?
That would be awesome.
That would be awesome. Exactly. Yeah. I confess I just watched Ghostbusters recently, and so the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man comes to mind when I see this striding over the mountains.
Yeah, well,
Not evil.
I was wondering, is he also indicating shook the earth? What was there, like, we've been having terrible weather, and shook the earth. Was there a,
Earthquake.
yeah.
An earthquake, maybe. It must have
Yeah.
felt like the earth was rumbling. Yeah. Yeah.
That sounds like the.
And they thought that was maybe God coming.
Was it after the crucifixion and the temple?
Temple curtain is torn.
Torn.
Yeah. The sky is torn in half.
Yes, and darkness covered,
Yep. The ground shakes. Yeah, everything.
well, like the plagues in Egypt.
Right.
The sun is covered and it's terrifying.
Blood running through the rivers and the
Yeah.
frogs and the locusts and
Right.
everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And plague went before him and pestilence followed his steps. So, death kind of comes behind God in God's wake.
Yeah,
Which
I
is kind of a
often think
different.
when we have been having such terrible weather, and is God telling us something?
Yeah. I've
Is he
heard
sending
people
us
say that.
word?
I've heard people say
It's
that.
almost the end of the earth.
This is like the imagery in the battle hymn of the Republic. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trembling on vintage with the grapes of wrath restored. I mean, that's not friendly.
No, that's not friendly language. No. And it really, and this is where the warrior God comes in that Anita was describing. We see God coming in ready for battle.
They said, my Bible says it's taken from different parts of the Psalms. They just took different things and put them all together.
Yep, and put them together very nicely,
Yeah,
I would say.
beautifully.
Yeah, very beautifully. I did, when I read that one section there, though, I thought, does God bring death or new life? Maybe because we have Jesus, I think of God bringing in new life for us, but maybe pre-Jesus you would think of death as the thing that...
There's the image too of sweeping away the old and creating.
Yeah, maybe it's making room,
That's taking a more optimistic view.
Yeah, that's very good.
After the forest fires, the new growth.
Right.
That's right.
starts.
New growth forest, yeah. So the trembling and the shaking, I think the author tells us means to judge. So when God looks and makes the nations tremble, they're trembling because God's judging them in this place. And that image of the ancient mountains crumbled and the age-old hills collapsed. It would be like, the banks of the Hudson just tumbling in, crashing in, or where I'm from, up in, where my first church in Vermont, seeing those mountains just come crashing down because God is standing there. But God outlasts those mountains, right? The mountains we think of as eternal, because in our lifetime we're not going to see them change very much unless dynamite is applied to them, if we do something. But they're going to be around past us. But in this image, Habbukuk says, even though those mountains are deep, they won't last as long as God. And so he's saying, this is the eternal one who's come. This is the one who's our forever God.
It's saying God will outlast the earth. Is
I
it
will-
suggesting that?
Yeah, God will outlast the earth.
And this is the theophany, right?
This is all his theophany. Yeah, this is his vision,
Yeah.
his experience. How does it feel to have a God who will always be there? As Habakkuk's described, as a God who will be there longer than the mountains. If you're going through a hard time, think about
That God will always be there.
that God will always be striding in
Or in Matthew, lo, I am with you even unto the end of the age.
unto the end of the age. Yeah, that experience of Jesus as being eternal also
Yes.
is part of our faith tradition.
Yeah.
That in his resurrection we get to hold on to him again and again. So he's going to outlast whatever calamity comes upon us, any messes that we get ourselves into. Jesus will be there. For me, I know I feel hopeful when I think of that. And it,
Please forgive me, but I have to leave.
yes. But it gives me that kind of big picture.
Yeah.
That this moment's crummy, but God's going to outlast this moment, and at some point things will get better.
Bye, Joan.
Hmm?
I said,
Bye, Joan.
Bye.
Have a great day. And so in verse 7, he says, I saw the tents of Cushan in distress, which means because of the injustice that they've experienced, and the dwellings of Midian in anguish. And anguish here is interpreted as almost quivering before God. And that takes us back to our earlier conversation about being in awe. The dwellings of Midian, everybody's feeling God's presence here and feeling God's awesomeness in this theophany, in Habakkuk's vision here. So instead of the people going about their business as usual, they're now like, ooh. Ooh. I often think, for people who do terrible things and dismiss God in their lives, who dismiss the love of Jesus or the love of God in their life, that when this life ends and they come face to face with that love, I think we all experience that quivering, like, oh, there is something bigger than me. There is something awesome. And in our resurrection, we get to experience that face to face in ways that we get a glimpse of here, maybe. But in our resurrection, and in that moment, God wraps us up and says, yeah, you don't have to be afraid. You can be in awe, but don't be afraid. I'm here to love you, not to hurt you. All right, great. Well, you get the week off for good behavior. Or bad, whatever. You still get the week off. And I think do we go to the end of the book next time?
Not that much left.
Is that our last session? Just one more?
Just one more.
Yeah.
It would have to be.
So just read to the end, to page 325. So up to, I guess it's verse 19. It's the end of Habakkuk. And we'll read about the victorious warrior. We have God kind of eyeing the scene right now. Next time we get to see what God does. Okay?
Yep.
And wherever you can find awe, look for it. Look for it.
Right.
It keeps us connected. Thanks for coming, folks. And Doug, thanks for watching. Or whoever else is watching. I don't know. I'm not sure anyone else is watching. Bye, Anita. Have a lovely day.
Bye-bye, you too.
Take care.